Hi, I'm Jacob Gallucci, and right now I'd like to present the track list for my last two Rock and Roll Roots albums, volumes 41 and 42. Yeah, this is it. Earlier this year, from January until July, I presented the track list for volumes 27 to 40, and now I'm about to present the track list for the last two albums, volumes 41 and 42. And anyway, here's volume 41. Track number 1 is Can't Get Enough of You, Baby by and the Mysterians, and this song's from 1967. And this was their third biggest hit. It didn't make the top 40, but it just missed. It peaked at number 56. And their two biggest hits, 96 Tears and I Need Somebody, actually did make the top 40. 96 Tears made it to number 1, actually. It's one of the biggest hits of all time by a garage rock band, I would say, definitely. It's one of the biggest garage rock hits of all time, for sure. And I Need Somebody was the follow-up to it, and it actually did make the top 40. It made it to number 22, and Can't Get Enough of You, Baby, it didn't make the top 40, but it did alright. It made it to number 56, and all three of the songs I mentioned are on Rock and Roll Roots albums of mine, and Can't Get Enough of You, Baby sounds a lot like 96 Tears, like almost exactly like it. From what I've read, the reason for that was that the record company that they were at, Cameo Parkway, wanted them to make it sound like 96 Tears, so that's why it sounds so much like it. The strange thing about this song is that I had no idea that they did it originally. They had one of the early versions, and the first time I heard the song was actually the remake by Smash Mouth. They were a 90s pop rock group. I heard their remake of it before I knew of this version by and the Mysterians. And needless to say, the version by and the Mysterians is a lot better, for sure. This is a good song, but it's not as good as 96 Tears or I Need Somebody. But it's still worth listening to, definitely. Alright, track number 2 is Love Plus One by Haircut 100, and this song's from 1982, and they were a British group, a British new wave funk rock group. They had more success in the UK back then. They had a few hits out there, but here this was actually their only top 40 hit, and it's not a bad song. It's kind of a forgotten hit from the early 80s. It's not bad. It's really not. Alright, the third song is Hold Me Tight by Johnny Nash, and this song's from 1968. And this song's an early example of reggae. And believe it or not, this is actually his second biggest hit behind I Can See Clearly Now. Yeah, Hold Me Tight was an even bigger hit than Stir It Up. And all three of those songs are on Rock and Roll Roots albums of mine, and Hold Me Tight is definitely a forgotten hit. It's one you rarely ever hear on the radio at all. You hear I Can See Clearly Now all the time. Stir It Up you hear sometimes, but you rarely ever hear Hold Me Tight, and it's not bad. It's a shame that it's as obscure as it is, really, honestly. Okay, track number 4 is At the River's Edge by The New Colony 6, and this song's from 1966. And they were a local group from the Chicago area back then, and a bunch of their songs are on Rock and Roll Roots albums of mine and for Bob Stroud as well. And this song wasn't actually released as a single, but it's a garage rock classic. It really is. In their early days, they had a garage rock sound, and shortly after that, they became more of like a sunshine pop, early light rock, adult contemporary kind of group, and this isn't a bad song. At the River's Edge isn't bad. Track number 5 is Butter Boy by Fanny, and this song's from 1974, and they were an all-female rock group from back then, and believe it or not, Butter Boy was their biggest hit. It was one of their two top 40 hits. Butter Boy peaked at number 29, and it's not as famous as their other top 40 hit, Charity Ball. Charity Ball peaked at number 40, and that peaked at number 40 back in about 1971, and that was on an early Rock and Roll Roots album of Bob Stroud's, Volume 3. And they were one of the first all-female rock groups, and Butter Boy it actually was a bigger hit, but you rarely ever hear it on the radio. Charity Ball you hear every now and then. Butter Boy you almost never hear. And supposedly this song was about David Bowie. David Bowie was dating one of the members of the band at the time, and he actually was a fan of the group. He liked Fanny. He really did. They really should have been a lot bigger than they were. And Fanny, this song sounds kind of like the theme for the TV show The Facts of Life. You know, that 1980s sitcom? I think the theme kind of rips off this song. It has like a similar melody and a similar sound. It sounds kind of like this song. This song came out in '74. The Facts of Life was on from 1979 until 1988. I think the theme kind of ripped this song off. I really do. Listen to both. It's weird. It really is. And this isn't a bad song. Charity Ball's better, but Butter Boy's not bad. And another one of their songs was on an earlier Rock and Roll Roots album of mine, their cover of the Beatles classic, Hey Bulldog. And it's a good cover. They do a good job on Hey Bulldog. The Beatles version's better, but their cover's not bad. Okay, track number 6 is Falling Apart at the Seams by Marmalade, and this song's from 1977. And they were from Scotland, and they had more success out there, like in the UK and Scotland and England, and this was actually their second biggest hit in the US behind Reflections of My Life. Reflections of My Life was their only top 40 hit in the US, and it was a hit in 1970. That was on a Bob Stroud album, Volume 4. Their follow-up to it was Rainbow. That was on one of my earlier Rock and Roll Roots albums, and that should have been a bigger hit. That only made it to number 51. And then Falling Apart at the Seams came out a few years later, and that made it to number 49 here. So it was a slightly bigger hit than Rainbow, and Rainbow's a better song, but Falling Apart at the Seams isn't bad. They sound completely different, these songs. I mean, Rainbow's like folk rock, or it's like folk rock, or like acoustic rock, or light rock, you know, or country rock even. Falling Apart at the Seams is like disco rock or funk rock. It has a disco sound, it definitely does. You have to realize it came out in 1977, so disco was big back then, like with like the Bee Gees and like later Four Seasons, like songs like Who Loves You and December 1963, Oh What a Night. This song sounds a lot like a Bee Gees song or a song by the Four Seasons from that time. And it's not a bad song. Reflections of My Life and Rainbow are better, but Falling Apart at the Seams isn't bad. It's a catchy song, it's fun, it's not bad. It should be more well-known than it is. Alright, the 7th song is I See the Light by The Music Explosion, and this song's from 1967. And this was the B-side of Little Bit of Soul. Little Bit of Soul was their only top 40 hit. And that was on an earlier Rock and Roll Roots album of mine, and Sunshine Games was their second biggest hit, but that only made it to number 63, and that's on an earlier Rock and Roll Roots album of mine, and I See the Light didn't chart, but it's a good B-side. Little Bit of Soul's a much better song, and that was on an earlier album of mine, and I See the Light's not bad. It's not the same I See the Light as the one by the Five Americans. The Five Americans I See the Light is a completely different song. It has the same title, but it's a different song. That was on an earlier Rock and Roll Roots album of mine, as well as their biggest hit, Western Union. And I See the Light's not bad, but it's not as good as A Little Bit of Soul or maybe Sunshine Games. It's about at the level of Sunshine Games, I would say. Okay, the 8th song is Silver Moon by Michael Nesmith, and this song's from 1970. And going back, I See the Light's from 1967, and Silver Moon by Michael Nesmith is track number 8, and it's from 1970. And this was his follow-up to Joanne. Joanne also came out in 1970, and that made the top 40, actually. It was on an earlier Rock and Roll Roots album of mine as well, and Silver Moon just missed the top 40. It peaked at number 42, and it's a good song, it really is. It's not as good as Joanne, but it's a good song, and it's a good example of country rock and light rock, singer-songwriter, you know, southern rock as well. And Michael Nesmith, of course, was in the Monkees, and by then they had pretty much broken up. And while at that point he left, they were still kind of together. They had just broken up, I think. By the time they broke up, only 2 of the members remained, Davy Jones and Mickey Dolenz, and that was it. And Silver Moon's a good song, it really is. Joanne's better, but Silver Moon's solid too. Alright, the 9th song is Why Pick on Me by the Standells, and that's from 1966. And this is their 3rd biggest hit behind Dirty Water and Sometimes Good Guys Don't Wear White. And both of those songs were on earlier rock and roll roots albums of mine. And, well, Dirty Water was actually their only top 40 hit. Sometimes Good Guys Don't Wear White just missed a top 40. That peaked at number 43. And then Why Pick on Me was their 3rd biggest hit. That peaked at number 54. And Why Pick on Me is a cool song. It has like a raga rock. It has like a raga rock sound, or like also like an Eastern type of sound, or like a psychedelic kind of sound. It's garage rock too, and it's a cool song. It's not as good as Dirty Water or Sometimes Good Guys Don't Wear White, but Why Pick on Me is not bad. It's really not. And the 10th song is Honky Funky by The American Breed, and this song's from 1969. And they were a local group from the Chicago area, and this was their last song to chart. It didn't make the Billboard Hot 100, but it actually just missed. It peaked at number 107. And it's not as good as their free top 40 hits, Bend Me, Shape Me, Step Out of Your Mind, and or Green Light. But Honky Funky's not a bad song. It's alright. By then, they actually had a female member of the group. It's true. Towards the end, they had a member in the band who was a female. That's why there's a woman on this song. Their earlier hits didn't have a female singer, but this song does. It doesn't even really sound like The American Breed. It's strange. It's not a bad song, but it's worth hearing, I'd say. It's not as good as their earlier hits and minor hits, you know, but it's not bad. Okay, track number 11 is Grizzly Bear by the Youngbloods, and this is from 1967. And this was their 2nd biggest hit behind Get Together. Get Together was on an earlier rock and roll roots album of mine, and their 3rd biggest hit, Darkness, Darkness, was on an earlier rock and roll roots album of mine as well. And their most famous song and their biggest hit was Get Together. Their 2nd most famous song was Darkness, Darkness, but it wasn't as big of a hit as Grizzly Bear. Grizzly Bear peaked at number 52 on the charts back in 1967, and late 66, early 67, and it's not a bad song. It's a good example of folk rock. Get Together and Darkness, Darkness are better songs, but Grizzly Bear is not bad. It's really not. Alright, the 12th and final track on Volume 41 is Romeos Tune by Steve Forbert, and this song's from 1979. And this is a good song, it really is. It's a great example of a lost hit or a forgotten hit, and it should be more well-known than it is. It's really not a bad song. Kind of sounds like something Warren Zevon would have done, you know? It's not bad. It's really not a bad song. It was his only top 40 hit. It came out in late 79, early 80, and it's definitely a forgotten gem. It should be more famous than it is. It's a good song, it really is. Romeos Tune, yeah. Romeos Tune by Steve Forbert. That's the closing track on Volume 41. And now, last but not least, here's Volume 42. The last Rock and Roll Roots album. Alright, the opening track, track number 1 on Volume 42 is Explosion in Your Soul by the Soul Survivors. And this song's from 1967. And this was their 2nd and final top 40 hit after Expressway to Your Heart. That came out back in 1967, and that was on a Bob Stroud Rock and Roll Roots album, volume 9. It's a classic song, it really is. It's a great example of blue-eyed soul, definitely. Explosion in Your Soul was the follow-up. It's good, but not as good as Expressway to Your Heart, definitely not. Explosion in Your Soul sounds like 2 songs. It's weird. It sounds a lot like Expressway to Your Heart, and it also sounds a lot like the Sam and Dave classic, Hold On, I'm Comin'. It sounds more like Hold On, I'm Comin' than Expressway to Your Heart, but it definitely sounds like both songs. It's a good song, but it's not as good as Expressway to Your Heart. Definitely not. Okay, the 2nd song is Take It Slow Out in the Country by Lighthouse, and this song's from 1971. And they were a Canadian group from back then, and they had horns in their sound. They had like a jazz rock kind of sound, and this is their 4th biggest hit behind One Fine Morning, Sunny Days, and Pretty Lady. One Fine Morning was actually on a Bob Stroud Rock and Roll Roots album, Volume 2, several years ago. And their two other hits, Sunny Days and Pretty Lady, were on Rock and Roll Roots albums of mine. One Fine Morning made it to number 24, I want to say. Sunny Days made it to number 34. Pretty Lady just missed the top 40. It peaked at number, I want to say number 54 maybe, somewhere around there. Take It Slow, Out in the Country made it to number 64, and that was their fourth biggest hit. It's not a bad song, but it's not as good as the other three, definitely not. Alright, the third song is It's a Beautiful Day for Lovin' by the Buckinghams, and this song's from 1969, and they were a local group from Chicago back then, and they were pretty big for a little while. Their bigger hits were Kind of a Drag, Susan, Mercy, 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 Hey Baby, They're Playing Our Song, Don't You Care, among others. A lot of their hits were on Rock and Roll Roots albums of mine and Bob Stroud's, and this was their last song. It's a Beautiful Day for Lovin' was their last song to chart. It was their final single to chart. It charted in 1969. It didn't actually make the Billboard Hot 100. It just missed. It peaked at number 126, I want to say, so it was a very minor hit. And it's a shame because it's a good song. It really is. It's a quality song. It should be more well-known than it is. It's not as good as Susan or Kind of a Drag or some of their other big hits, but it's a good song. It's worth checking out, definitely. It's worth hearing, and I like it. I really do. It's a pretty song. The fourth song is A Thousand Shadows by The Seeds, and this song's from 1967. And they were a garage rock group back then. They had one top 40 hit, Pushin' Too Hard. That was on a Bob Stroud album, Volume 4, I want to say. That made it to number 36. Their second biggest hit was Can't Seem to Make You Mine. That was on one of my albums. That made it to number 41. So it just missed the top 40. And Mr. Farmer was their fourth biggest hit. That was on an earlier album of mine. And A Thousand Shadows was their third biggest hit. And it's on this album. It peaked at number 72, and Mr. Farmer peaked at number 86. And they're all good examples of garage rock and psychedelic rock, too. And A Thousand Shadows it's not a bad song and all, but it's not as good as the other three, definitely not. And A Thousand Shadows sounds a lot like their biggest hit, Pushin' Too Hard. It sounds a lot like Pushin' Too Hard. Pushin' Too Hard's a better song, but A Thousand Shadows isn't bad. It's really not. Okay, track number 5 is This Time I'm In It For Love by Player, and this song's from 1977. And this is their second biggest hit behind Baby Come Back. Baby Come Back was on an earlier album of mine, it's from their debut album, and This Time I'm In It For Love is also from their debut album, and Baby Come Back made it to number 1, and This Time I'm In It For Love actually made it to number 10, so it was a pretty big hit, too. You still hear Baby Come Back a lot on classic hit stations and classic rock stations as well. This Time I'm In It For Love you rarely ever hear, and it's a shame because it's not bad. Baby Come Back's a better song, but This Time I'm In It For Love is actually pretty good, too. It's a quality song. It's definitely a forgotten hit. It's underrated, and it should be more well-known than it is. Okay, track number 6 is The People and Me by The Music Machine, and this song's from 1966. And this is their second biggest hit behind Talk Talk. Talk Talk was on an earlier Stroud album, Volume 5. And that's an early example of punk rock, or proto-punk, or hard rock, or heavy metal, or psychedelic rock. It's a really good song. The People and Me, it didn't quite make the top 40. It peaked at number 66, and it should have been a top 40 hit. It's not as good as Talk Talk, but it's a good song, too. It should have been a bigger hit, definitely. Okay, the seventh song is Can't Sleep by the Rockets, and this song is from 1979. And this is their second biggest hit behind their cover of the early Fleetwood Mac song, Oh Well. Their version of Oh Well is on an earlier Stroud, is not a Stroud album, it's on one of my albums, actually. It's on an earlier album of mine. And it's a cover of a Peter Green era Fleetwood Mac song, so early Fleetwood Mac. Their cover's good, but I prefer Fleetwood Mac's original. And Can't Sleep actually was from their debut album. It was their first single. It made it to number 50 on the charts, so it just missed the top 40. Oh Well actually did make the top 40. It peaked at number 30, and that was their only top 40 hit. Their version of Oh Well is definitely better than Can't Sleep, but Can't Sleep's a good song too. It's not bad. It should have been a bigger hit. Okay, track number 8 is Nighttime by The Strangeloves, and this song's from 1965, and this is one of their 3 top 40 hits. The others are I Want Candy and Carol Lynn, and those are on Rock and Roll Roots albums of mine. And Nighttime is their second biggest hit behind I Want Candy. Their third biggest hit is Carol Lynn. And Can't Sleep made it to number 30. Carol Lynn made it to number 39. I Want Candy, I believe, was a top 10 hit. It may have made it to number 1, or it was definitely a huge hit. Their version's a lot better than the cover by Bow Wow Wow from the mid-'80s, definitely. Bow Wow Wow's remake isn't bad, but The Strangeloves did it much better, definitely. Nighttime, I think, is their second best song behind I Want Candy. I would take Nighttime over Carol Lynn, definitely. Okay, it's not a bad song. It's from 1965. It's a good example of garage rock, you know. Track number 9 is You're Gonna Be Mine by The New Colony 6, and this song's from 1967. And they're a local group from the Chicago area. They were pretty popular here back then, and this song didn't make the top 40 nationally, but locally it was pretty popular. Nationally, it was a minor hit. It didn't make the top 40, but I think it made the Billboard Hot 100, or it was just under that. It was a minor hit nationally, but locally it did well. And it's not as good as some of their other hits, but it's not bad. It's a quality song. Okay, track number 10 is Everything Will Turn Out Fine by Stealers Wheel, and this song's from 1974. And this is their third biggest hit behind Stuck in the Middle with You and Star. And both of those songs are on earlier Rock and Roll Roots albums of mine. Everything Will Turn Out Fine isn't bad. It's not as good as the other 2 songs, Stuck in the Middle with You and Star, but it's a quality song too. It's underrated. It just missed the top 40. Stuck in the Middle with You, I think, made it to number 5 on the charts, I want to say. Star actually made it to number 29. And Everything Will Turn Out Fine made it to number 49, I believe. So it just missed the top 40. And it should have made the top 40, because it's a good song. It's not as good as the other 2, but it's a good song. It's from the same album as Star, their 1974 album, For Gustley Park. And one of the members of the band, Jerry Rafferty, he had 2 big solo hits a few years after this on his 1978 album, City to City. The songs are Baker Street and Right Down the Line, and both of those songs are on earlier Rock and Roll Roots albums of mine. Okay, track number 11 is Satisfaction Guaranteed by The Firm, and this song's from 1985. And they were a super group from back then. They featured most notably Paul Rodgers and Jimmy Page. Paul Rodgers was previously the lead singer of Free and Bad Company, and Jimmy Page was the guitarist in the Yardbirds, and then of course later on Led Zeppelin. And The Firm, their only top 40 hit was Radioactive, and that was on an earlier Rock and Roll Roots album of mine. And both that song and Satisfaction Guaranteed are from their debut album, their self-titled debut album. It's from 1985, and it was their first of 2 albums. They released one more in 1986, and then they broke up shortly after that. And it's a good song, but Radioactive's better, definitely. Satisfaction Guaranteed didn't make the top 40. It peaked at number, I want to say, about number 61, or somewhere around there. It's a good song, but it's not as good as Radioactive. And Paul Rodgers, he was in Free, and 2 of their songs are on Rock and Roll Roots albums of mine, All Right Now and The Stealer. Those are on earlier Rock and Roll Roots albums of mine. Okay, the 12th song is It's a Crying Shame by Gail McCormick, and this song's from 1971. And Gail McCormick was in the group Smith. Their only top 40 hit was Baby It's You. That was on a Bob Stroud album, Volume 6. And that was a cover of the old Shirelles song, and the Beatles did it too. The Beatles cover is on their debut album, Please Please Me. I think Smith did it the best, so I firmly believe that. Gail McCormick had a really good voice. She really did. She kind of sounded like Janis Joplin, you know, sort of. Their follow-up to Baby It's You was Take a Look Around, and that was on an earlier rock and roll roots album of mine, and that just missed the top 40. It's a good song, too. It made it to number 43, I want to say, about 43, 44. It just missed the top 40, and It's a Crying Shame just missed the top 40 as well. That peaked at number 43 or 44. I think Take a Look Around peaked at number 43, and It's a Crying Shame made it to number 44, so it just missed the top 40. And it should have made the top 40 because it's a good song, it really is. It's not as good as Baby It's You or Take a Look Around, but It's a Crying Shame's good. It's a fun, upbeat song. It sounds like it would have been a huge hit back then, but it wasn't. It's really a good song. It's fun, it makes you feel good. And it's definitely a great example of a forgotten hit. Alright, and since this is the last Rock and Roll Roots album, I included one bonus track. Stroud included a bonus track on Volume 11, I included a bonus track on Volume 26, and then on this one, Volume 42, there's a bonus track as well, and it's Roses and Rainbows by Danny Hudson. Roses and Rainbows by Danny Hudson's the bonus track, and it's from 1965. And Danny Hudson, he's one of... Later on, from starting in about late 68, he became one of the free lead singers of Free Dog Night, along with Chuck Negron and Corey Wells. And they were huge from the late 60s until the mid 70s. Free Dog Night was huge. They had 21 top 40 hits in all. Yes, 21. Roses and Rainbows actually got some airplay back then. It's a really good song. Roses and Rainbows is definitely a great example of a forgotten hit. It's a good song. It's very underrated. The drumming on it's phenomenal. I love the drumming on it. And believe it or not, as good as this song is, it didn't make the top 40. It only made it to number 73, I want to say. So, somewhere in the high 70s, 70, 71, 72, 73. I want to say 73. And it should have made the top 40. It's a crime that it didn't. It's a really good song. Roses and Rainbows is really a good song. Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys loved it. He really did. He was a big fan of the song, and he loved how, like, Danny Hudson's vocal on the song, it's like a three-part vocal. It's all Danny Hudson, though. You can hear him singing, like, the harmony vocal, but it's him doing free vocal parts. It's really good. It's a good song. It's a quality song, and it should have been a much bigger hit than it was. Anyway, that's it. That was Volume 42, and I presented the track list for the final Rock and Roll Roots albums that I made, Volumes 41 and 42. And anyway, I'll be back next month with 2 new videos, and until then, take care.